As the Prime Minister and I have said, Australia is undergoing an economic transition. Not a crisis, but a transition which needs careful economic management. This transition is brought about by the Chinese mining investment boom coming to an end. It's brought about by growth in our biggest trading partner, China, beginning to slow. This needs careful economic management to ensure that we continue to grow and grow strongly, that we continue to have low unemployment and strong growth. This is the key economic challenge for the government. We need to ensure that our economy continues to grow and build on the remarkable success of recent years. You can see here that not only has Australia grown more strongly than comparable nations over the recent period, but we're also projected and forecast to continue to grow more strongly than comparable nations. And of course, we're doing this with low government debt and low deficits. Again, you can see the comparison is stark, which underlines why Australia is one of only 8 countries in the world with 3 AAA credit ratings with a stable outlook. But nevertheless, the fact that the world economy is growing more slowly than at this point would have been hoped is having an impact on Australia. It's having an impact on our terms of trade. It's having an impact on our economy. Here you can see the difference between terms of trade forecast at budget time and that we are forecasting today. At budget, the terms of trade were projected to fall by 0.75% in 2013-14. Now they are projected to fall by 5.75%. This is a dramatic decline, which of course impacts on our revenue and our economy. By June 2015, terms of trade are expected to be 10% lower than was assumed at budget time. Of course, this has an impact on our nominal GDP, which is the value of the things we produce as a nation. Here you can see our nominal GDP growth being below the 10-year average and continuing to be below that average into the future. Nominal GDP growth has fallen from 5% in 2013 forecast at budget time to 3.75% in the update we are releasing today. There's also an impact on real GDP growth. Real GDP is now forecast to grow by 2.5% this financial year, down from 2.75% at budget time. And this has also led the Treasury to change its projection on unemployment, which was projected to reach 5.75%, but is now projected to reach 6.25% in 2013-14. This softening in our economy underlines the need for careful economic management. The economy doesn't need harsh and swinging cuts at this point in the cycle that would make our economy smaller and would lead to higher unemployment. The economy and the budget need sensible, well-thought-out measures which support jobs and growth now, but return the budget to surplus in the medium term. And that is exactly the approach the government has taken. The slowing in the world economy and the reduction in our terms of trade and the softening in the economy has meant a reduction in our forecast government revenue of $33 billion over the next 4 years. We've taken responsible savings and revenue decisions which will amount to $17.4 billion over that period, or in net terms, $8.1 billion. You can see here in the orange the decisions the government has made and how they impact on the government's fiscal strategy and returning to surplus in 2016-17. The budget will return to surplus in 2016-17, posting a surplus of $4 billion or 0.2% of GDP. We've also taken an explicit and deliberate decision to bring down a modest deficit in 2015-16 of $4.7 billion or 0.3% of gross domestic product. This is, as I say, to ensure we continue to grow. We continue to have strong jobs growth and strong economic growth. Bringing the budget to surplus with lower terms of trade requires extra effort. but it means a structural improvement in the budget, a structural improvement in the budget, which is an important achievement. Of course, we've taken a number of difficult decisions to get to this result. Of course, we've increased the tobacco excise, a measure which will raise over $5 billion in revenue, which will also discourage over 200,000 Australians from smoking and particularly discourage young people from taking up the habit. We've increased the efficiency dividend to drive better productivity in the public service, better outcomes. The Minister for Finance will provide further details. We've rephased our overseas development assistance budget. We'll still meet our target of aid as a percentage of GNI of 0.5% by 2017-18, an important target which we'll meet, but we'll get there in a different profile. All of these savings measures come with no reductions in family payments or pensions. No reduction or abolition of the school kids bonus, which of course Mr Abbott would abolish. No reduction in the age pension, no change to family or pension payments. Before I hand over to Penny, I do want to say just a few things about another measure which you may have noticed got a little bit of media attention today. That is the introduction of a financial stability fund. Now, as you know, the IMF conducted a public review of Australia's financial system that concluded that Australia should develop a financial stability fund with a financial stability levy as a matter of high priority. A former Treasurer referred that public recommendation to the Council of Financial Regulators. They advised the government that Australia should develop a financial stability fund. Now, as you know, Mr Stevens, Mr Laker, Mr Medcraft are not known as radical or rash men. They are generally regarded as amongst the world's best financial regulators. And when they make a recommendation, the government should listen. After due consideration, they advised the government that it was a good thing to establish such a fund for Australia. Now, in my month as Treasurer, I've met with many people across the financial services sector. I've telephoned, met them, spoken to them. On most of these occasions, I've mentioned that I was considering this recommendation and got feedback. Of course, not every bank chief executive or not every bank, but certainly have mentioned and consulted on this matter. Now, unsurprisingly, people in Australia's banks would prefer that the taxpayer continued to provide the guarantee with no charge to banks. That's an unsurprising position for them to take. But the government properly listened to the financial regulators. We also listened to the sector. Of course, the regulators recommended a levy of between 5 basis points and 10 basis points. We think a levy on average of 5 basis points is the right model at the lower end of the scale. Also, the regulators suggested that we aim for between half a percent and 1% of deposits. With the lower levy, that means we'll aim for 0.5%. And I've listened in particular to small banks and credit unions, and I've asked the Treasury to consult very carefully in the coming months to ensure that there's no anti-competitive effects, particularly for small banks and financial institutions. Now, this has a long lead time, doesn't come into place until 2016. But we'll work constructively with the financial sector as they prepare for this change. I want good and profitable banks in Australia. I'm well known for my support for the financial services sector in Australia. But when you look at the fact that the big four banks in Australia have made a profit of $92 billion over the past 4 years, I think it's appropriate that the government look at this 5 basis points levy and banks can decide whether they will take that out of profits or pass it on. Of course, this is a controversial decision, but I believe it's the right decision. It may not be needed for a long time, but the time may well come when people look back, maybe 20 or 30 years' time, and say it's a good thing that this Labor government took this decision, preparing for the future, developing this fund, which of course most nations in the G20 already have. Labor built the 4 pillars of the current financial system, and now we're building a roof in case of a rainy day. Now, of course, today we're laying out our plans, our costings, our bottom line. We are laying out all the financial details. That is appropriate for the government to do. It is now open for criticism, for condemnation, for praise. That's the right thing to do. The alternative government should be doing exactly the same thing, not running away from the Charter of Budget honesty, but embracing it as the child of their side of politics, not tearing it up, but respecting it as both political parties have done now for 15 years. I'm going to hand over to the Minister for Finance now to talk through some other details.
Thanks very much, Treasurer. I'll only speak briefly. I've no doubt all of you have a number of questions. But I do want to detail just a couple of measures in the economic update. As the Treasurer has said, the approach this Labor government has taken has been to find responsible savings. Responsible savings that are fair and equitable and that make room for important reforms such as disability care and the Better Schools plan. We've chosen not to take savings from health or education. We've chosen not to cut the services that Australian families rely on. That is the Liberal approach. We've chosen a different path of responsible savings in an economic environment which has become more challenging, as the Treasurer has outlined. However, we do retain our commitment to strong public finances, the same commitment which has ensured the AAA credit rating from all three, with stable outlook from all three ratings agencies. And as such, we've had to make a number of decisions which are difficult but are necessary to ensure that we have a sensible pathway to surplus as is outlined in the economic statement. As the Treasurer has said, we have reduced our expenditure on official development assistance by about $1 billion over the forward estimates. I would emphasise that our expenditure in both dollar amounts and as a percentage of GNI will continue to grow, and the aid budget will still reach $5.7 billion in 2013-14, Australia's largest aid budget in history. We will still meet our GNI target for 17-18. Obviously, an area that's had some attention in recent times is the government's regional resettlement arrangement with Papua New Guinea. I'd refer you to pages 40 and 41 of the statement, which set out the arrangements for the funding of this plan. The estimated operating cost of the arrangement is $175 million in 13-14 and a cumulative total of just over $1 billion over the forward estimates. This will be partially funded from a reduction in the operating costs of the onshore network of $423 million over 4 years. There are also capital costs of $194 million in 13-14 to expand Manus Island facilities. Funding of $236 million over 4 years is being offset from a reduction in the aid budget and $23 million from the contingency reserve. The remaining costs of this package have been offset from whole of government savings. In addition, Australia is providing additional $420 million in new aid to Papua New Guinea to go towards specific health, education, justice and law and order and transport projects and programs consistent with the arrangements that the Prime Minister entered into. This will be funded by redirections in existing AusAid programs, but not from existing PNG programs. The government has also identified $1.8 billion in savings over 3 years by increasing temporarily the efficiency dividend on the public service from 1.25% to 2.25% for the periods 2014-15 to 2016-17 inclusive. The advice from the Department of Finance is that most agencies can absorb the temporary increase in the efficiency dividend through a combination of non-staff cost savings, natural attrition and voluntary redundancies. The government continues to make it clear that it expects agencies not to resort to rounds of forced redundancies in order to meet these targets. The government, however, is also continuing to invest in frontline services, and the economic statement provides a further $20 million per annum to the Department of Human Services to reduce call centre waiting times. As I said, these have been difficult but responsible savings. They are savings that contribute to the sustainability of the federal budget. They build on more than $180 billion of savings that we've identified in our past 6 budgets since 2008-9, because if we are to continue to ensure Australia is a strong economy in the decades ahead, we have to make the responsible savings today to fund the investments the nation needs for the future. Thank you.